First of all, I want to thank Carlos and Silvia for inviting me to be here. And as she has said, I am a faculty member of the Department of Statistics, Computer Science and Mathematics here at the Public University of Navarra. And I am also part of a spin-off called Mobalsys, which aim is to improve health and physical status through the use of innovative technology to monitor human movement. So I am going to tell you about inertial sensor technology for movement monitoring. And I am going to start with the utils we use, that are the inertial sensors, and the beginning of these things. They start in the early 20th century, in the World War, and the main application were aerospace and defense. Here we can find a missile guidance system where these inertial sensors were used to track position without external references. There is another device from the NASA. It's an aerospatial navigation, the Apollo IMU, and it measured orientation and trajectory in space. They were very, very big, but thanks to the innovation of technology, we have been able to transform all these big things in smaller devices that we can use to measure movement, as we are going to see next. So one of the important things was the development of microelectronic mechanical systems. They start in 1970s in research labs, also for military and aerospatial uses, but later in 1990s, the silicon and micro machine and semiconductor fabrication make it possible to do these things. They are very small, cheaper, and more reliable. And if we see the inside of these things, we have the utils that we use to measure the movement, that are the accelerometers, magnetometers, and gyroscopes. In particular, we have three of it. Well, one of these one in each axis. The axes are the normal axis of the space, the vertical one, the mediolateral, and the anterior posterior. And accelerometers measure linear acceleration, which is the change of the velocity during the time. Gyroscopes measure the angular velocity, or the angular velocity, and finally the magnetometers, the strength and direction of the magnetic field. And with these things, we are going to be able to measure the movement. So prior to this inertial sensor, it was possible to measure movement, but with another devices. Well, they were very, very big, expensive, and above all, laboratory-linked equipment. In this case, we have a system of Vicon cameras that make it possible to measure the sprint of this girl. And here we have this treadmill with a force plate to measure how this man performed the gait. But the drawbacks were the dimension. They are very big, the money, very expensive, and the difficult of use. Not only the placement, because we are linked to these laboratories, but also the person that use these devices has to be experts. But now we use these things. This is the big device that I use to measure the movement, and it's IMU from Movella company. And we are able to put this device in which place of the body we want to measure. For example, here, if we want to measure how the arm is moving, or here in the leg to measure the gait. That is going to be very important in my applications. For example, one of the main advantages of these devices is that we can move we can move this device in the place we want. For example, here, this is a real movement analysis in the Casa Misericordia here in Pamplona. And here we were measuring the gait of this elderly woman. And imagine if we ask this woman to go to a laboratory condition and make her walk. The walk is going to be very different from the normal one. So it's very important to measure in the place they're living to not difficult the way they are going to act because for the condition. So now I'm going to explain because it's not very easy to from the device to obtain the information. So this here is going to be the process. So we normally put the sensor in the lower back of the person here, and we measure the raw data. The raw data are the acceleration and the orientation, well, the angular velocity at these Earths from 50 to 2000. And then we have a data processing. In the data processing, we have the filtering to remove the errors and to provide the meaningful signals. And then we extract the features from the signals. I am going to talk about the object of my thesis, that was to measure the sit-to-stand movement. The sit-to-stand movement that I measured in my thesis was from the 30-second chair stand test. In this test, we have 30 seconds to stand and sit from a chair as many times as possible. But we have these signals, but clinicians don't know anything about these signals. They need parameters. So the first thing to the feature extraction is to cut the movement into the different phases. For example, the transition when I start standing, when I finally get stand, and when I go back. So the first thing is to cut the signal into the cycles, and then from the cycles obtain the corresponding parameters that a clinician has asked to obtain. So in the processes data, we have step counts, for example, in the gait test, or for the force you perform when you stand up in the chair test. And then we give the visualized and real-time reports to provide all this data in a good way. For my point of view, this data is like our fingerprint. Why fingerprint? Why? Because it's unique to ourselves, and it's something we can measure, and is something for us. This is a real example, also with an elderly woman that I am measuring the gait, and this is an example of the report that we give the clinicians. Here we can see the parameters of the gait, but not only the parameters in blue of this subject, but also the parameters of another wide of population we have measured before. Here we have measured in Albacete for 3,000 of people, and in green there are the healthy subjects, in yellow the pre-frail, because it was something about knowing the frailty of these subjects, and in red the frail ones. So not only you have the parameters, but also you know how you are regarding the other ones, the normal population. And if you, here the subject is very good, because it's more better than a healthy subject, but if you are not so good, you can have a recommendation of exercises as the BB Frail program to improve your health, because the frailty is something that you can improve. And if you are a pre-frail one, you can become non-frail or healthy if you perform the corresponding exercises. So why it is so important to move, or what is the relevance of motion and health? Here we have 3 statements about the HU, and it's dealing with how many deaths can be prevented if we are more active, or the cost of care about insufficient physical activity, or the consequences of not doing physical activities, about illnesses, or also depression, anxiety, and these things. So it's important to measure, and also well, I have said that you have to perform exercise, but not everybody is prepared for any exercise. So there are some examples of CrossFit or climbing, but not everybody can do this. So it's important to measure how you are, to know which kind of exercise you can be able to perform. And also in competition, if you measure, you can see if you are going to be broken. For example, remember what happened with Carolina Marín last summer, or here I have put some data about the cost of this, Daniil Yamal, and the amount of money that he costs per day. So it's very important to be healthy and not be injured And one thing that we can do is to measure. So we are very used to this kind of diagnostic test that as this blood test. In blood test, we can measure, well, if we have some illnesses, if we have cholesterol and these things. And normally we do a blood test one per year or something like that. So I asked me, why we don't do the same things in terms of movement? So before we have the laboratory movements, and now we have our sensors. So it's very easy to know how we are in terms of our physical status, to know which kind of things we can do or how we can improve our health status. And now I am going to talk about my fields of application, the ones we have work with Mobalsys, the company. They are physiotherapy, neurorehabilitation, geriatrics, and also prevention in the workplace. So in all of these, the things we have done is to measure the things and to provide clinicians or experts to more information or parameters, that is something that is lacked, to improve the diagnostics. In physiotherapy, it doesn't matter the kind of sport, but it's very important the way you jump and the way you perform a sprint. And we have measured these things in handball and also in football. Here is the Tajonar Cup. And we have obtained some conclusion about horizontal jumping biomechanics. We can measure which hand players has or not anterior cruciate ligament reconstruction. Imagine you only see the jump. It's very difficult to know if he has had an illness or not. But knowing the signals and the way this girl moves is going to be very easy. In particular, in this vertical jump, we have seen with some parameters that there are some difference between the injured men, in this case were men, or the not injured ones. In the case of neurorehabilitation, we have been working with ADACEN, with a stroke person, and we know the movement of the arm and the movement of the legs, especially regarding the other part of, the left and the right part, are going to be different. And it's very important to track the little improvements during the recovery, because this very, very slow in some cases, and for them it's very important to see the differences. Even the differences only like this. That is something very difficult to see with our eye. So it's important to measure and to obtain the corresponding parameters that can provide the difference. For example, here there is some signals about the gait. In red, in green is the leg is not injured, and the blue is the one that has been injured with a stroke. And we have two different patients and the three axes, the mediolateral, anterior posterior, and vertical. At first sight, we know that there is some differences, but we are not able to say if the patient at A has a gait, because all of them is for a gait test, a good gait or a bad gait regarding the other patient. But if we see the mediolateral, because the mediolateral is the axis more important in these cases, and we see different parameters, in this case, step regularity, stride regularity, or asymmetry, because the asymmetry is very important, we can finally say that the gait of the patient A is going to be worse than the gait in the patient B. Another field was geriatrics. It's the one I am more specialized. In geriatrics, we try to measure frailty. Frailty is an illness that says if we are more prone or not to suffer from more consequences, a big consequence if we have an illness. It's more used for elderly people, and the frail ones, for example, if they have a cath, maybe they have to go to the hospital, and being in the hospital is not very good for them. So to measure these frailty things, we use a test that is called SPPB, and in the SPPB we have the gait test in 3 different positions, the gait test, the balance test in 3 different positions, and the chair test that I have told you before. And in this case, we have done the measurements in the Casa Misericordia and here also in Santander. And one important thing that we have seen in this article is that we have tested the 30-second chair test in another population with frail, pre-frail, and healthy subjects. And normally, the clinician what test in this chair, what take from this test, is not the parameters from an inertial sensor because they don't have time in their normal evaluation. They only count the amount of stunts that the subject performed during the test. So in these subjects, both of them, the pre-frail and the healthy ones, have performed the same number of repetitions. But if we take an insight into the parameters from the inertial unit, we can see that the maximum velocity while standing up from the pre-frail was quite smaller than the ones in the healthy. And this is very linked with the force they have in their legs. And it's something very important to falls and this kind of thing. So even the test has the same output for both of them, the way the test was performed was different. And finally, we have the prevention in the workplace. Here we have measured workers in the chain of Volkswagen, and we have put our sensor in different places to monitor if a movement was executed a lot of times or if the movement was harmful for the person. And in the Ford Motor Company, they have developed this system that measures repeated movements and forceful postures to track musculoskeletal disorders. So if they perform these things, they know maybe or is more they are probably have these kind of things, like epicondylitis. That is something they had in Volkswagen. But due to the new technology, to algorithms and things, I think that it's important to move to a new dimension, that is combining sensor and machine learning or deep learning to obtain more information about what is happening, to be able to prevent or to do other kind of recommendations. Before we have seen this scheme about only a fingerprint, but what happens if instead of one fingerprint we have a lot of them? Mixing this with the machine learning and deep learning algorithms, we are going to be able to provide more parameters, improve the diagnosis, or even prevent certain illnesses. And here we have two examples. In this first one, inertial sensor has been mixed with machine learning algorithms to develop a physical activity advisory system and ensure the correct execution of certain movements. In this other case, the thing was they wanted to recognize the neurological population and the way they move. But measure a neurological person is not very easy, so in this case they use convolutional networks to generate and augment the inertial data images to improve the data sets. So this is the final, and a little conclusion is how we are going to remain in our diagnosis and our things if we can to take advantage of new technologies, new algorithms to improve our diagnosis and help clinicians with these things. So thank you.
Thank you, Nora. I think we have time for a few questions. Is there any question? I have just one curiosity. The number of sensors you need, the minimum number.
It depends on the application.
Of course, but
and normally,
to
in my
give an
case, for
idea.
the elderly people, we only put one here.
Just one, okay.
But for the neurological condition, we normally put two because we want to know the turn of the leg because
Okay.
they perform a specific movement because they do like this. Well,
Okay.
you can see. they do like this because they don't know how to move their body properly. So, depending on the
So
movement,
at least
we need
one,
at
with
least
one
one,
you
yes.
can do something. But you have a big data at the end
Yes.
to process.
Beautiful talk and lovely application. I was wondering how you could take this to, like developing frailty, say osteoporosis in women or something. How would you see this going further to, say, evaluate how the bones are weakening?
Sorry, can you repeat the last thing only?
So could you kind of push your talk a little further to see how you could use this for assessing how osteoporosis is weakening bones, say in women,
Yes,
for
the
example?
thing is to track if someone is going to be to know when someone is going to be frail, to change the status, because it's very easy to change the status performing exercise. And this is something we here in Pamplona, some clinicians do the SPPB with the sensors to monitor the physical condition in terms of parameters. Because if not, the only thing you see is how they walk. If they walk in 5 meters in 13 seconds, but the way they move is not possible if you don't use an inertial sensor.
Okay. Any other question? I think we can close this section and we are ready for the lunch. Okay. Thank you all.